Hello. बंद कैसे करना?
हाँ, वो नहीं किए हैं ना, इसीलिए लीव हो गया सबका।
National Conference on BRICS Development and Governance.
I would now like to call upon the stage Professor Christopher Tapscott to address everyone. Let's have a round of applause for him.
You can also start from there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I can't see it.
So, I think get started.
Who's on the presentation?
सर ने लोड किया होगा ना पीपीटी पीपीटी this one.
Yeah, that's one. Yes.
Which one's in this one?
Yeah, that's one. Yes. And then the down key is,
And this again.
which is the down?
Left and right.
This is,
Yeah.
okay.
Let us share screen then. You have this screen.
We go into full screen for the presentation. Not sure if you go on to it. Yeah, no. Good morning, everybody. The topic of my presentation is on BRICS shaping the future of global development. It's obviously a very broad topic, and BRICS, as we well know, has multiple different facets to it, cultural, economic, technological, many other different dimensions to it. I will only be focusing on the two issues relating to shaping the future of global development in a time of turmoil. And I'll be looking at the progress being made in BRICS in respect to changing the global order, and secondly, in its orientation in promoting development in the global south. This thing is still buffering. Excuse me, this is still buffering. So it's probably pretty well known that we do live in very troubled times at the moment. We have an increase in regional wars, which could escalate into global wars. Democratic gains that we've had across the world are being eroded. So a rise of authoritarian regimes. And in many parts of the world, particularly in Africa and West Africa, increase in coups d'etats, which is always a bad indicator of the state of democracy. And then again, in Europe and the United States, other places, rapid rearmament. This is also not a good sign, possibly leading us into further wars. And a growing trend of unilateralism. If you look at the political agenda of Donald Trump, it's definitely towards unilateralism. And an increase in the bipolarization of the world, far from the dream of a end of history and a unified world that happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union. We are back almost to a Cold War situation. And some commentators have actually said that where we are in the world right now, no. Well, obviously, this is a very broad and complex topic, and you can go into different states and different areas and come up with different reasons. But there is, while there's been some growth in economies in the global south, generally there's a growing inequality between north and south. And then this is aggravated by the fact that you have growing populations, economic growth that is not keeping pace with the growth in population, and to competition over resources, both between and within countries. So these are the sort of fundaments of tension that are building. And then at the very time when we need collective action, because we are faced with the threat of global of climate change, which is an existential threat to all of us, this comes at a time of growing tension and growing polarization. So the question that I pose is then, what can BRICS do in this context of growing turmoil and uncertainty? Well, let's just go back a bit to the ideas, some of the founding ideas behind BRICS. It was in the first instance a counter-hegemonic initiative, basically challenging the right or the presumed right of the global north to be able to dictate to the global south on its foreign policy, on its economic policy. And the objective here was to establish a more egalitarian and multipolar world. But to do that, there was perceived to be a strong need to reform financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, WTO, terms of trade, because these impact negatively against countries in the South, and also to reform global governance structures. The Security Council, for example, the veto rights of 1 or 2, 4, 5 countries to be able to decide against a popular vote within the United Nations. One member of the inner circle of the Security Council can veto a decision. And it had an ambition too to promote more multilateralism, not to get away from the blocks of countries that are looking after their own interests, and to expand South-South cooperation. That has been a key focus of BRICS. And the fact that we are here in a conference such as this is part of this initiative of bringing together partners from across the big spectrum. And also to establish a new system of development assistance, moving away from the old Bretton Woods model, and coming up with a new way of providing support between countries. So these are some of the ambitions at the time. I've obviously glossed over them. They're more complex than that, but these were some of the founding ideas behind it. Now, the interesting thing about BRICS is its architecture is very different from that of, say, the European Union, NATO, the United Nations. It doesn't have a permanent secretariat. or an office for that matter. And the chair of it rotates from year to year, from one member to another. So the year coming up, it will be based in Russia. So it's not a political bloc in a sense. It's a much more loose confederation of partners. And then the chairperson in any particular year, in consultation with the other members, but also with some prominence in what they have to say, sets the priorities for BRICS for that particular year and sets the calendar of events. So it does give quite a lot of influence to the chair for a particular year. And decisions are based on consensus. And this often means that difficult issues in BRICS are skirted around because you want to maintain consensus. You don't want conflict within the organization. And so this has also meant, for example, there's no consensus at the moment on reaching agreement on what the reform of global governance actually means. And that's just been parked. In part, you can imagine why, because two of the members of BRICS have a veto right on the Security Council and would not necessarily willingly give up that veto right. So that issue has just been pushed to the side for now. But this openness is in a sense a strength and a weakness. It promotes consensus and it promotes non-alignment, but there are very few rules on collaboration, on dispute resolution, or on solidarity. So in the case of the Ukraine war, BRICS members, I think with the possible exception of Brazil, in the United Nations General Council, abstained from a vote. But there are no rules about who needs to do what at the time. It's left to an individual country to make that decision. There aren't, in this particular club, there aren't, and it's more like a club than a formal organization. Another key element of BRICS is non-alignment, saying we don't want to be drawn into the struggles of countries in the North. That's your fight, it's not ours. But having said that, though, with the exception of, say, tensions now between Russia and the West, some trade wars between America and China, BRICS itself is not anti-North or anti-West, whatever you like to call it. It hasn't set itself out in opposition. I think this is an important point going forward. And it's not anti, it's more rather bypassing to say, well, you do your thing, we are going to do something else. We're going to model our structures according to our particular needs. We're not going to slavishly follow your particular model. And what is indicative of this is that BRICS, instead of deepening its relationship between the original 5 partners, coming up with rules about, like a NATO one, attack to one is attack to all. We must all respond. It chose to expand its membership. And I'll say a bit more about that because it adds more complexity to exactly what BRICS is about. And for example, I've been doing a lot of reading on this. I haven't come up with any clear set of criteria that were used to allow in new members. It seemed it was part of horse trading that was going on. I know that Brazil wasn't very keen on the expansion, but eventually agreed to it, but saying we're only going to agree to it if Argentina comes in. So there was the decisions were based on, I don't know, because there were multiple countries that applied, why they settled on these particular ones. I haven't, maybe somebody in the audience has more insight than I have, but I haven't been able to come up with a reason how they chose these particular ones. But BRICS states have no restrictions on their own members partnering or going to relationships with countries in the global North. There's no restriction on that at all. And many countries, South Africa, Brazil, India, do indeed have close trade relations, all these countries. The only thing is that their engagements with the global North must not harm BRICS states, but it's a fairly minimalist restriction in that sense. So I'd say a little bit about the new BRICS development assistance. It is challenging the dominance of what is known as the OEC DAC, Development Assistance Committee rules, because they have very strict rules on what constitutes development assistance. And BRICS in particular has been playing a role in sort of trying to reformulate this. And the first one is to say, we are not donors, we are development partners. And in so doing this, combining trade with aid. And so you often get a mix of grants, technical assistance, loans, investments. And when you're doing research on it, as I do, it's very often difficult they're often indistinguishable. And it's very difficult to get a fix exactly. Was this trade or was this a genuine sort of form of development assistance that you would normally associate from OECD countries? And the other key element here, because this is a huge concern in many development countries in the South, is that there are no conditionalities imposed. And anybody who studied aid and looked at things like structural adjustment programs that were brought in, particularly to Africa, and the devastating effect they had on economies in these countries, threats of taking away your aid if you don't comply, threats of sanctions, this type of assistance was trying to move away from that. And the new development bank, which was set up specifically for this purpose, has played a role in this, and a strong input on infrastructural development, sustainable development, has been a key vehicle for this new form of development assistance. There has been criticism of it, however, to say there's a lack of transparency, apart from the fact that you don't know what is aid and what is not. A lot of the aid is done through private companies. There have been criticisms of corruption, misuse of resources. And another one is to say, because there are no conditionalities, you can be leading poor countries into debt traps. So in other words, they take on more money than they can possibly repay, simply because there are no conditions. They keep on taking loans. So the question is, how does the BRICS aid actually differ from traditional forms of aid? And in the literature, they talk about three types of components of assistance. They are the drivers, like why are you actually giving funding? Why is the country actually offering assistance? Well, there's foreign policy issues, geopolitical positioning. You want to be seen as powerful and a friend in the particular area, economic interests. And I also have to add, there's altruism. Some countries genuinely want to help, are not doing it for particular assistance. We know that in the Cold War, aid was a weapon. It was used by the Soviet bloc as well as by the United States to bring you over to their side. So your aid becomes a trading commodity. And then the tools are the types of support, whether you provide grants, subsidies, technical assistance. That's one of the things. And then finally, the modalities. And the modalities are whether you impose conditionalities. Now, when you do an analysis of it, there obviously are differences in the modalities. That is very clear. But in some of the tools and drivers, you'll find very similar things. It's not with the DAC model. It's not true that all BRICS funding is based on mutual partnerships. It's simply not a reality. Some of it is for economic gain, and as I said, to reinforce regional hegemony. Surprisingly, because we are a middle-income country, South Africa is also an aid giver, which is a bit ironic because we get aid from other countries as well. The other interesting thing, possible exception of China, of Russia, the current four BRICS countries are themselves recipients of assistance. So the very time we're recipients, we're also giving money out. And South Africa too, by the way, does make contributions to neighboring country. And I'm being a bit cynical of my own country, but it also is very much about positioning South Africa as a regional hegemon, if we can say. And there's also huge variance in the type of assistance. China's is trade for aid. Brazil's aid, for the most part, is technical assistance, which doesn't have the same benefit. It has some, positions you as a good guy in the region, but it's a completely different type of aid from the one that you'd get from, say, from China. Having said all that, many countries do favor the assistance they get, particularly from China, which has played a major role in infrastructural development in Africa. It can't be dismissed as that. And I won't go into any particular country in any details. And so what is the impact? What is interesting is with the spread and the amount of assistance that's coming from BRICS and other new development assistance countries, the northern countries are changing their modalities because they feel that they're losing out on markets. And so they are promoting their own economies far more, and it's shifting from concessional loans, from normal grants to concessional loans to partnerships. And so in fact, what you find is now a convergence of the modalities. So it's not quite as distinct, but that change has been brought about because of the initiatives of the new development assistance coming from BRICS countries. So then we move on to where is BRICS now in the world? And we move to BRICS Plus. And what has been interesting is that the interest of countries in the global south in joining BRICS has really increased dramatically. And before the last conference, because there's a conference every year, before the last conference, 40 countries expressed an interest in BRICS, and then 23 actually formally applied. And out of those, 6 were admitted. As I said, we don't know what the criteria were for the admission, but they were there. The increase of BRICS now to 11 will drastically, to my mind, change the dynamics and will create opportunities and challenges. And with its growing size, BRICS now has ambitions to become the voice of the global south. And indeed, the expansion, this didn't come out very well. The expansion in BRICS, we heard it said yesterday, moving towards nearly 50% of the world's population. And if you see the regional spread, with the exception of North America, is growing. So as a power block, it is certainly, as a potential power block, its influence is definitely spreading. The increase of the addition of 3 major oil producing countries, Iran, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, definitely increases the economic weight of BRICS. There's no questioning about that. And strengthening its leverage to produce more equitable financial and global systems, because, as you know, much of the world's economy revolves around oil. Now, if you've got 3 of the biggest oil producers, plus Russia as an oil producer, that does have an impact on the balance of things. And although this much talked about creation of a BRICS currency is unlikely to happen anytime soon, it's just too complicated to implement in the short term. Certainly, trading in local currencies will increase. And there's recently been this rupee-designated transaction between India and UAE, which is, in a sense, opposed to the old petrodollars. Is indicative of the type of exchange that can happen. Secondly, inter-country trade, which in a sense, not rely on the north, is another area of potential growth. And of course, increased numbers provide some protection from the impact of sanctions and protectionism. So right now, there's a threat that if you step out of line, you will be sanctioned. And in the case of South Africa, I fear our access to the African Growth Opportunities Act, AGOA, which we're a beneficiary of, is in jeopardy. A, because of its neutral stance on Ukraine, and secondly, for taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. Already there are senators saying we must cut South Africa. So, that potentially does create some sort of protection from that. So the challenges, it's not really clear what motivated these other countries that have come in to actually join BRICS. Why did they want to come in? Do they share the same values? Do they want a multilateral, multipolar world? Or are they just coming in because, we can join the gang and we'll be less isolated? We don't know. And the other thing is the current consensus-driven model is likely to be under challenge. In the past, they skirted around some of the big issues, but now when you've got 11, it's going to be much more difficult to do that. And particularly because we have tensions between some of the countries that have come on board. Iran and Saudi Arabia don't really have a loving relationship. We've got Ethiopia and Egypt, which are contesting over the damming of the Nile River in Ethiopia, which is stopping the flow of water to Egypt. And we all already have the pre-existing border tensions between China and India. So does this make for a happier family going forward? Then we also have the fact that some of those countries coming in, like Iran and others, have a very poor human rights record. And democracies like India, South Africa, Brazil are feeling a bit uncomfortable being in partnership with these particular group of countries. So how does this sit with your own electorate and your own public? And certainly in South Africa, the media has been having a field day on saying, your human rights record of Iran, and you are now in partnership with them. What does it mean for us by association? And they're also, the fact that countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE are close allies of the United States. And you saw Donald Trump going, and he's got a real bromance going there with Saudi Arabian Crown Prince. What will that happen when you're taking a more firm stance against, American interests? And there's also concern that it could become a platform for advancing the geopolitical interests of Russia and China. So they say, we have this club which is global in orientation, but you're using it for other reasons. So these are some of the concerns going forward. So what in the future of BRICS? BRICS has tried to mediate in certain cases with mixed results, or should I say, BRICS countries have tried to mediate. South Africa was trying to mediate in Ukraine with very little impact. China did have some success in mediating between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that's probably how it came into BRICS. The truth is there is still a strong interest in the global South in establishing new geopolitical order, geoeconomic order. So I think there's still, there still is a strong feeling in many in the South that we are seen as the children of a lesser God in the South. The real action is in the North, and we must just follow. And, countries like India, China, and others say, well, even South Africa say, no longer. Brazil, we have our own path. We're not going to slavishly follow your particular direction. So I think it could continue as a loose group of heterogeneous countries without too much structure. And its incremental increase, as it gets bigger, more and more the North will have to take cognizance of what is going on. But it'll also have to remain relevant. If it becomes just a power block opposing the North, then it's going to lose its way. It's got to keep on pushing for issues which are of direct interest to many countries in the global South. The terms of trade, pursuing the SDGs. These are all very, very pertinent issues. If it loses track of that, I think it'll simply become a power block. And a power block contra to the North, and then we're back to completely against the idea of multilateralism, completely against the notion of bipolarism. And then we just go back to a Cold War situation. And if we have that, then I honestly think BRICS doesn't have much of a bright future, and it will progress, because there will be too many contradictions in it at the time. It will eventually dissipate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening words. I would now like to request Professor Alexei G. Barbashev to address the audience. Professor Barbashev will be joining us via Zoom.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure and honor for me to participate in the conference, and I would like to continue this subject and problems which was before me already said by the organizer on the conference and Professor Tapscott about the future of BRICS and BRICS as a new phenomena in global situation in the world. First of all, I would like to say that BRICS is a very heterogeneous in its shape and in the countries which are the members of BRICS. From the prospects of Russia, we are staying as a part of not only of South but of the North also, because our country located mostly in the North Hemisphere and have a very great, biggest in the world Arctic zone. So for us to say that we are just staying in such a balance between South and North means that we are partly belong to South, partly belong to North. Is the second. That we are in the strong we are now in the clash with NATO and with United States and European Union, and this clash starts much earlier than the situation in Ukraine, because NATO starting to expand towards the borders of Russia years before the military operation in Ukraine has started as a response of this NATO moving towards the borders of Russia. As BRICS is a very heterogeneous, not homogeneous construction, for us now the problem that we try to concentrate on our internal capacities and resources, because BRICS try to help us, but this help is mostly not the direct help, but just a possibility to trade, possibility to discuss, but not more. For example, the sanctions against Russia, financial sanctions, sanctions against economy of Russia. This is very hardly touch us in Russia, and when countries of BRICS and a lot of BRICS banks just to avoid to trade in their own currencies, but prefer the US dollars. For us, it's impossible. It's very difficult for us to understand what to do in this situation. By the way, Russia tried to struggle against this Western bloc because feels this is because we feel that for us it's impossible just to say, okay, we are ready to be eaten by Western bloc, and Russia cannot don't ready to be disseminated. Because our country is very big, we have a lot of resources, we have a very strong system of governance, and a lot of subjects of Russian Federation which work cooperatively. I would like to explain what we're doing right now in this situation. First of all, we are concentrated on military and other response on the situation of conflict with Western bloc. Second, we are trying to develop our own internal capacities, including not only technologies, but also internal tourism, internal with support of traditional values, and also we trying to develop distant technologies. That's why I prefer to speak distant, because for me it was very difficult to visit India personally due to some limitation and sanctions of international travels for Russians. I would like to ask some questions, which is follow the discussion opened by Professor Chris Tapscott. First of all, is BRICS ready to work more cooperatively than now? It's very difficult to say yes or not, because BRICS is very not homogeneous construction. Is BRICS ready to start BRICS currency? Because now, for Russia prospect, it's very difficult to use the national currencies in our trade. Very difficult, and this is not perspective. It's better to have our general BRICS currency. Is BRICS ready to set the more contacts in the sphere of high technologies, in the sphere of exchange of people, to eliminate the barriers, visa barriers between the countries? Because now with India we have a very strong visa barrier. For me, it was almost impossible to apply for visa because of strong limitation, and organizers know about this. Is BRICS ready to not only to help other countries, but to defend these countries, because a lot of countries now is under the pressure, military pressure of Western Bloc. Russia, of course, can act by itself and ready to do this. We have no another option. But we hope that BRICS will be more homogeneous, more cooperative in the future. Of course, I can speak much more about situation in Russia right now, but as it will be my presentation about situation in Russia separate from this round table and from this short talk, I hope that this that now we are ready to move to the next event, and which panel discussion, governance in the times of global turmoil, because these questions of BRICS are strongly connected with the general global turmoil situation in the world. Thank you very much. Hello, colleagues. I finished.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for your enlightening words. Welcome to our panel discussion for today on the topic governance in the times of global turmoil. In today's interconnected world, nations face unprecedented challenges ranging from economic uncertainties and geopolitical tensions to public health crises and environmental threats. This panel will delve into the complexities of governance amid such global turmoil, exploring how leaders navigate crisis, foster international cooperation, and adapt policies to ensure stability and progress in an increasingly turbulent landscape. Join us as our esteemed panelists share insights, perspectives, and solutions for effective governance in these challenging times.
I would now like to take the privilege to introduce our first panelist, Shri Himanshu Shekhar Mishra. Sir, a distinguished senior editor at NDTV India, brings extensive experience in political and current affairs journalism, covering events like UN Annual Summit in 2003 and Indo-Turkish Summit. Besides journalism, he has researched topics like Jammu and Kashmir floods and urban flooding challenges in Srinagar and Chennai, published internationally. Actively involved in disaster management, Sir co-authored the book Stop Predicting, Revisit Life Lessons from COVID-19, published by Bloomsbury in May 2022, which highlights his impactful contribution to journalism and disaster research. We welcome you, sir.
I have the privilege to introduce our next panelist, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Professor Bhanumurthy, inaugural Vice Chancellor of Base University, Bengaluru, is a distinguished economist specializing in macro monetary economics and fiscal policy. With over 70 research papers and 5 books, he influences discourse in his fields. Beyond academia, he actively contributes to international organizations and government committees, receiving prestigious awards such as Mahalanobis Memorial Medal and the VKRV Rao Prize in Social Sciences Economics for his outstanding contributions to quantitative economics and social science research in India. Recently, Sir has been appointed as a member of the Governing Council of the Center for Advanced Financial Research and Learning, an institution under Reserve Bank of India. We welcome you, sir.
I am honored to introduce our next panelist, Professor Alexei G. Barbashev. Professor Barbashev, a tenured professor at HSE University, Russia, is a prominent figure in the philosophy of science and technology. With a Doctor of Science and a Candidate of Sciences degree, he is a leading expert in public administration, impacting national and international level. Beyond academia, he has advised on public service reforms under the administration of President of Russia and holds STEAM positions, including at the Woodrow Wilson Institute for Advanced Russian Studies. Professor Barbashev's global influence has significantly shaped the development of public administration theory and practice worldwide. Sir will be joining us via Zoom. We welcome you, sir.
I would now like to take the privilege to introduce our next panelist, Professor Christopher Tapscott. Professor Chris Tapscott, a leading expert in African development studies, is a professor at the University of the Western Cape. With key roles at institutions like the University of Transkei, he played a pivotal role as the founding director as UWC School of Government. His expertise focuses on citizenship, participation, and accountability in African development, impacting governance, social welfare, and public policy. Formerly the Dean of Faculty of Economics, he actively contributes into policy discussions, shaping governance and social development in Africa. We welcome you, sir.
I am honored to introduce our next panelist, Professor Dr. V.C. Vivekanandan. Professor V.C. Vivekanandan, Vice Chancellor of Hidayatullah National Law University, Raipur, brings 3 decades of legal education expertise. Formerly at NLS Bangalore and Nalsar, Hyderabad, he held leadership roles at IIT Kharagpur and Bennett University, specializing in intellectual property law. He founded the Legal Information Institute of India and led Nalsar Proximate Education. As an MHRD chair professor, he contributes to IP awards, is a published author, and pursues diverse interests in music, cinema, and travel. Dedicated to excellence in legal education, he is a global advocate for intellectual property. We welcome you, sir.
It is my honor to introduce to you our distinguished moderator for today's panel discussion, Professor M. Suresh Babu. Sir is an esteemed economics professor at IIT Madras and advisor to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. He holds a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. With expertise in applied macroeconomics, industrial economics, and trade, he is consulted for institutions like the Asian Development Bank and World Bank. A prolific writer and speaker, he is widely cited, a member of prestigious organizations like the Indian Economic Association, and recognized for his contributions to teaching, research, and public service. We welcome you, sir.
Before we begin, I would request Professor Suresh to please welcome our panelist with a bouquet. Shri Himanshu Shekhar Mishra. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Professor Chris Tapscott. Professor V.C. Vivekanandan. Thank you, sir.
I would request Professor Danish to please welcome our moderator, Professor M. Suresh Babu, with a bouquet. Thank you, sir.
I would now like to request the moderator, Professor Suresh, to take the panel discussion ahead.
Okay. Good morning, and let me thank the organizers for this opportunity to be here today for a very important discussion. And of course, for this warm hospitality at IIM Raipur. I realize that we are behind schedule as far the program is concerned, but I don't think that will stop us in terms of cutting our time from 1.5 hours. So, yeah. So what we shall do is that we have 5 speakers, so we will have around 12 minutes each, and then we will have some Q&A. I will not speak much because I think the audience is more keen to listen from our distinguished panel. So I will just set the context or the broad context by taking 5 minutes, and then I will hand over to the panelists in the same order as we were welcomed by the students. Okay. So the title for the panel discussion is Governance in the Times of Global Turmoil. Yeah. And I'm going to tweak that last word from that turmoil, borrowing something from physics, and then replace it slightly with turbulence. Now, the idea is that, I generally interact with technologists and scientists, so turbulence will give me a little more conceptual kind of a grip in terms of understanding what we are really, conceptually defining. Now, let me start in terms of a working definition of how do we really see this whole phenomenon of turbulence. Well, a situation where events, demands, and support interact and change in highly variable, inconsistent, unexpected, or unpredictable way. That's the typical definition of a turbulence from a physics point of view. Yeah. And very interesting words: inconsistent, unexpected, unpredictable waves. Yeah. Okay. And this is characterized by 3 features which we need to take into account when we understand governance, especially. There is a constant shifting of parameters. There is no stability of parameters. So it's very important to understand that. There is intercurrents because one action has important implications on the other kind of parameters. There is also temporal complexity of things, which means that, you need to be dynamic and stable, which poses additional challenge. Yeah. And we also need to understand that it is uncertainty. There is a difference between uncertainty and this turbulence/turmoil, because this is what causes uncertainty. It is not uncertainty per se. It is not a crisis. So it's again difficult to really get a grip of what we are talking. Yeah. A crisis can be explained in slightly more simpler terms. For example, the Eurozone had turbulence, but Greece had a crisis. Yeah. So it's not crisis per se, but it's a state. It's a state where things are under constant kind of uncertainty. Now, there are three features which we need to keep in mind. There are turbulent environments in which organizations and firms operate. There are turbulent organizations which creates turbulence globally as well as locally. And then there is a scale factor for this turbulence, which we need to keep in mind when we talk about organizations as well as firms. Now, the big question is how to live with this and how do we really adapt to this kind of turbulence. Okay. Now, it can be viewed as a condition which could last for a long period of time, and organizations can actually adjust themselves or re-engineer themselves to this lasting kind of a state of affairs. Or it could be a temporary dysfunction which requires another kind of a response from organizations. So there is one feature that we need to keep in mind when we talk about governance, especially when we talk about this turmoil slash turbulence. That is, there is a lot of unexpected interdependencies that might develop under these conditions. And this is very important because, how do we really tackle this kind of unexpected interdependencies are a very crucial factor in terms of designing strategies of governance as well as organizations. So I would see that there are four dilemmas which organizations face in this context. One, stability versus change. Yeah, because change is occurring continuously. So do we really have a stable kind of an setup to really tackle with this? Second dilemma is anticipation versus resilience. Do you really anticipate or do you really build resilience in anticipation of something? So what is your focus? Third is there is a kind of a dilemma between tighter coupling, or should we decouple with this whole turbulence creating kind of environments? And fourth, we find that there is a dilemma between integration and differentiation. Okay. Now, let me stop with a couple of more kind of dilemmas which we see. Now, there is a kind of an increasing need to build resilience now because this state is continuing for a longer period of time. So how do we build this kind of resilience into systems of governance? Very important in these times. Second, should we at all control the root cause of this turbulence, or should we distance from this root cause of turbulence? Yeah, the coupling versus decoupling kind of a thing. Yeah, one of the commonly advocated strategies is to distance, but how far can we do that? And in what ways can organizations achieve that? And then there is a big kind of a question that, is this the new normal that we are talking about? We know that during COVID times, we were talking about a new normal. And then what was the new normal was not clear. Is this a new normal that we are talking about? And what is the kind of an empirical evidence we see in terms of adapting to this turbulence? Is it going back to this old systems of governance, which is basically path-dependent kind of a system, or is it a time to shake up this governance? So these are some very preliminary thoughts that I had when I thought I could tweak this last word, turmoil, to turbulence. Now, I will stop here, and I will now invite Himanshu to offer his comments. 12 minutes? Yes.
Is it visible here? Yes. It is indeed a great privilege to share my views on an issue which is troubling BRICS for many years now. And Professor Suresh Babu sir very clearly gave us a theoretical paradigm, I would say, of exactly in what context we need to discuss issues and challenges that BRICS is facing. And my presentation would largely relate, sir, to the last 2 points that you said, whether we can couple or decouple with this, or we have to learn to live with it. Now, this presentation somewhere falls in the last 2 points that you made. The subject, as you can see on the screen, climate change, threats to sustainable development and disaster governance in BRICS, a framework for cooperation in disaster management. Now, when I was first asked by a university professor in JNU to study this subject, I was surprised that of the 5 worst disaster-affected countries in the world, 3 are in BRICS, but there was very few literature available in terms of BRICS leadership taking steps to enhance cooperation in this area. There were gaps, wild gaps. And then I wrote a paper, and this presentation largely draws from that and also takes my thoughts forward on this subject. As we know that climate change is gradually changing the contours of global climate, and as the global community grapples with its increasingly debilitating impact on human life and property, the role of public sector, public administration institutions, and disaster management agencies worldwide is becoming more critical and important. And apart from initiating disaster mitigation measures and launching large-scale rehabilitation and reconstruction work in the aftermath of a disaster, the public sector institutions have to play an important role in launching effective disaster mitigation and risk communication strategies. Some basic facts. The threat, of course, from climate change, global warming, rise in the intensity, frequency, and scale of disaster incidents is largely on sustainability of the development process. Now, this is, of course, for BRICS, in the context of BRICS, very, very significant, because when the Sustainable Development Goals were framed in September 2015, 10 of the 17 SDGs and 25 of the 169 targets identified were related to disaster risk reduction. There was an admission of the fact that the global community will have to collectively work and address these challenges that disasters are posing. But unfortunately, as the UN Secretary General said on September 15th last year, halfway to the 2030 global goals deadline, the world is woefully off track. Weather, climate, and water-related sciences can supercharge progress. And then the World Meteorological Organization released a report called United in Science, and it states that in 2023, the halfway mark to the 2030 agenda, climate change undermines nearly all sustainable development goals. Now, that is a very, very worrying trend that despite serious efforts, we are far behind the target. Now, the second important fact on the subject we're discussing, UNEP released its Emissions Gap Report 2023, broken record temperatures hit new highs, and it said that today the projected increase is 3%. However, predicted 2030 greenhouse gas emissions still must fall by 28% for the Paris Agreement 2 degrees Celsius pathway and 42% for the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. So we are far, far behind in terms of taking steps to address some of the core reasons why disaster incidents are rising. And this is, of course, a graphic image of the point that I read. And ahead of the COP28, UN Secretary General went to Antarctica and he released series of reports there. This is one image of UN Secretary General in Antarctica. And he said that in Antarctica, I saw for myself and heard from scientists how ice loss is accelerating in dangerous ways. Climate change is wreaking havoc. Fossil fuels are the main culprit. I had the privilege to interview UN Secretary General when he was here for the G20 summit. And I remember I told him that if there is one sentence that I've used the most in my research, is his favorite quote that climate change is running much faster than we are. And he would say this frequently in the layman's language to encourage the world to take more steps. And these are, I'll just pass through. We do know that NASA reports show that summer 2023 is hottest on record since they started collecting data, and 90% of global warming is occurring in the ocean. The annual rate of rise of sea levels, etc., are very, very well known. Now, what are the impacts on the ground of climate change? Now, this is a very detailed study, perhaps one of the most detailed study that has come out from the United Nations. This was United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and CRED, which is an institution which does research on disasters. It said that in the period 2000 to 2019, there were 7,348 major recorded disaster events, claiming 1.323 million lives, affecting 4.2 billion people. And look at the losses, $2.97 trillion in global economic losses. And this is sharp increase over the previous 20 years. And then you can see the data. And the last point in my presentation, the rise in climate-related disasters, including extreme weather events, from 3,656 climate-related events in the 1980-99 period to 6,681 climate-related disasters in the subsequent 20-year period. And this shows the growing challenge to the sustainability of the development processes. Now, the top 10 countries in the slide, you can see China is the worst affected. It is close to 600 disaster incident reported, and then India now ranks 3. And there are other BRICS countries also, which figure in this list later. In terms of affected countries, you can see China, 577 events, and with a wide variety of over 500 events, including geophysical, hydrological, and meteorological events. Most affected country by flooding was China. India, of course, was second most affected, and an average of 17 flood events. And this is something that every Indian watches on television every year, and approximately 345 million people affected. So the climate-related disaster incidents are rising, and they together account for over 2.8 billion disaster-affected people. Number of deaths. This is all data that was just to substantiate and highlight a cause that I want to bring your attention to. And the widespread droughts in India affected over 300 million people in 2002 and 330 million in 2015. And look at the number of people who lost their lives in disasters. Now, Brazil also hit by more than 3 natural disasters a day in 2023. This is from National Center for Natural Disasters report. And Brazil registered 1,161 disasters in 2023, mainly floods and landslides. And that, of course, came to more than 3 natural disasters a day. But despite the fact that the frequency, the intensity, the scale of disaster incidents are rising, the BRICS countries need to do a lot more than what they have done so far, because this is affecting billions of people within BRICS. Now, this is one flood that I reported, which changed the course of my life. This is the image of Srinagar, one of the first aerial images, worst floods in 102 years. And it caused devastation worth $16 billion. The IIM, the annual disaster statistical review said that this was the costliest disaster in the world in 2014. It cost Kashmir $16 billion. Now, anyone who knows Jammu and Kashmir, it's not a very big state. And for a state like Jammu Kashmir to lose $16 billion was a big setback. And the finance minister, Drabu, when he went to submit his budget proposals, he said that the per capita income of the state had declined. Second, quickly, I'll run through Chennai. This is the image of the Chennai airport. Disaster that happened just a year later. And in terms of losses, you can see it's 3 billion. And these were big companies, because the Chennai metropolitan area is a big hub of car manufacturing, vehicle manufacturing, and all these companies had to shut their facilities when the water level started rising, and no one, of course, was prepared to face this. And then the Kerala floods, the most devastating flood, happened a couple of years later, and it, of course, affected more than 5 million people. A large number of people died. And the estimated losses here was 4.8 billion. So if you just look at these 3 flood incidents that I've studied, 2014 Jammu Kashmir floods, 2015 Chennai floods, and 2018 Kerala floods, the total losses that India suffered was close to $19 billion. Now, a country like India, and of course, a large part of this loss of property is not insured. So, and neither is there any viable system of compensation to the poor people. So these losses actually mean a lot. It changes millions of lives. But the impact is not only limited to disasters. It is now threatening the agricultural production in India, climate change. And just a couple of facts on the screen, you can see former Union Minister of Agriculture said for every 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, yields of rice, wheat, soybean, mustard, groundnut, and potato are expected to decline by 3 to 7%. Now, this has been largely the age of inflation. Last 2 years, we all have suffered from that. But this problem, of course, is expected to grow because as per the studies under NICRA, rain-fed rice yields in India are projected to reduce marginally in 2050 and 2080, and irrigated rice yields by 7% in 2050 and 10% in 2080 scenarios. Now, but the problem is that by 2050, India is already the most populous country in the world. The population, of course, would be much bigger, but the food production is expected to decline. And this is one subject that BRICS needs to focus on. So I'll be proposing just a couple of more minutes, sir. A new institutional approach to enhance cooperation in disaster management and promote sustainable development practices. The rising threat of climate-related disasters, of course, makes it imperative for BRICS to scale up institutional cooperation and weave a disaster risk reduction vision in the development strategies that BRICS countries need to follow collectively. They need to work together to set up disaster resilient. They need to, I think we've missed one slide. Just a minute. Yeah. BRICS member states must work to set up disaster resilient structures, formulate disaster mitigation strategies, and prepare a framework for launching post-disaster reconstruction and rehabilitation work. And we have seen that this is not only limited to the climate-related disasters, but also to the public health disaster that BRICS suffered. And I remember in the last BRICS conference that I attended, my presentation was on how COVID had a debilitating impact on BRICS when 3 countries figured among the top 5 worst COVID-affected countries in the world: China, India, and Brazil. And of course, some work has been done. As you can see on the screen, a task force has been set up, but we don't see an aggressive outreach to actually address the challenges that BRICS countries face. BRICS needs to set up a disaster response fund to help launch development aid in disaster hit areas. Funds can be utilized to help build up disaster resilient communities. And also, BRICS Development Bank can play the leading role in creating this special fund. Now, few institutional structures that needs to be thought of: a BRICS Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Management, a BRICS Rapid Response System, a BRICS Earthquake Information Center, a BRICS Meteorological Center, a BRICS Disaster Management Center. And parts of these institutional mechanism is already functional now in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and all those ASEAN member states. They're already implementing these ideas. An institutional academic framework, a BRICS university network, an institutional academic platform to help facilitate exchange of information and new knowledge, like the kind of platform we have now. Here, we need to have far more number of such frequent interactions where we share the best practices that are now being followed to address these challenges. And of course, new ideas for establishing a mechanism for initiating also post-disaster reconstruction work. And this is one idea which I think is only implementable now within ASEAN group of countries, because they have very specific arrangements. BRICS can send team of disaster experts to help launch relief and rescue missions. BRICS can also help launch programs designed to strengthen community resilience, an action plan on cooperation on climate change, and we need to create a platform where best practices between disaster management agencies within BRICS countries can take place. And last 2 slides about creating a national information pipeline. I think a lot of work is happening in this field, and I think BRICS member states should share the new efforts that are being made to set up disaster communication pipelines, so that in the event of a disaster, we saw the entire world struggle to sensitize people on the threat of COVID-19. So Government of India at the moment is planning to roll out a cell broadcast technology-based disaster alert systems in next 6 to 7 months. And as part of this exercise, the National Disaster Management Agency, the common alerting protocol was also tested. And large number of mobile phones users in the country, many of you must have also received this kind of message. They received an emergency alert message on their mobile handsets as part of this pilot project. The first one was sent in July, and this is what it looked like. And when I called up the secretary, NDMA, he said that this is a pilot project, but very soon India will have a system where around 1 billion people who use mobile handsets now in India, they will get this message directly on their mobile phones in the event of a disaster. Now, this common alerting protocol, of course, will bring together the stakeholder agencies, and a flood watch mobile app was also launched by Central Water Commission. I had interviewed the chairman of Central Water Commission, and this is a fantastic app. For instance, if you're going to Delhi, and you can just need to go to the flood watch mobile app, especially if you're traveling in monsoon season, and it gives you all the data about the level of water in Yamuna River, the degree of threat of disaster in a given area, so that a person who is entering a new city or a new state can get all primary information in just one app. So it's so easy. And if you can keep more and more people out of a disaster zone, it only helps you combat the impact far better. And as I said, this national information pipeline needs to be people-centric. And of course, a national disaster communication policy is also something that people need to work on. And the new advancements in communication technologies can actually be leveraged to create such a national information pipeline. And I think with this, sir, I think I can end now. Climate stability development agenda, of course, is one subject that which a lot of work needs to be done by the industry and the business within the BRICS framework.
Thank you. Thank you, Himanshu, for raising some very important issues as far as climate risk and how we would like to move forward in terms of proposing certain ideas. May I now invite Professor Bhanumurthy to share his thoughts. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Suresh. First of all, let me thank IIM Raipur for inviting me to this conference, especially to the director, who made our day start the day by visiting the villages. So I think that's a very good beginning for all of us. Coming to this panel discussion, as Suresh very clearly laid out, there are many issues related to global turbulence. In fact, it reminds me our RBI governor's statement some time ago, when he said that India is, the global economy facing what is called as a VUCA effect, VUCA. It's almost close to what turbulence definition that we are given: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And given this kind of a context, how the individual countries navigate their economies is something very challenging. And in fact, we are very proud to say that among the BRICS countries, India has navigated much, much better than other countries. Not only the BRICS country, I think other countries in the world. And we have balanced both growth as well as inflation much, much better than many countries. In fact, the economies get surprised by the numbers that's coming from India, particularly when you talk about inflation, when you talk about growth rates, or you talk about poverty numbers. So I think if you look at any of the indicator that's coming from India, I think certainly it surprises average economist in this country. So to that extent, I think we managed extremely well. And in fact, I'll go to what Professor Christopher mentioned in the beginning. What is that commonality between these countries to get together? I think that's something that we all need to understand. In my view, BRICS is basically an outcome of overall globalization process that started in 90s and all those things. And these are the 5 countries. They were performing above average, I think much better than advanced countries. And the reason why they got together was basically as a emerging market group, as a pressure group within the global economic order. And one of the indicators we may want to look at what brought this whole 5 countries together was the savings. And if you look at the savings, I'm sure all of you know that India is one of the highest saver in the world. And I think when it comes to savings, even China also saves much more than India. And so other countries in the BRICS nation also save much, much higher than other advanced countries. So I think we were brought together by the outcomes of the globalization process, which led to large savings. Even today, if you look at the foreign exchange reserves, I think these 5 countries are holding much more than many other, if you add up other advanced countries. So I think during the globalization, we got together. But now, as you rightly pointed out about decoupling, I mean, we're talking about deglobalization. Now, this is a huge challenge for these countries to be staying together in the process of reverse globalization that's happening. And I think, in my view, the cooperation between the BRICS and the governance between the BRICS should be much more integrated right now than during the globalization process. And I think this is the time, I think they need to be working out, as Himanshu pointed out, how, I mean, in the last slide, he put up so many BRICS. So I think there are many more BRICS councils, whether it comes to disaster, whether it comes to how the savings can be shared among themselves. All those things can be really strengthened in the post-COVID period. Even today, if you look at the issues related to debt, I think all of you know that in the post-COVID period, one of the important indicator that's coming out and discussed much more is the debt and debt-related servicing kind of an issues. In fact, this is where we expect the new development bank, which is the BRICS. In fact, all of us should be proud that the whole BRICS Development Bank was declared during the India's presidency in 2012, when Dr. Kaushik Basu was the chief economic advisor. And I think that was the time the idea of BRICS Development Bank came up. And we need to look at, again, coming back to Professor Christopher's point, we need to look at how this NDB is actually able to address these issues that the countries are facing. Now, not only 5 countries, we have 11 countries in the group. So I think we need to look at how the NDB can, I'm not sure the youngsters who are here, they know there is something called NDB, New Development Bank. How many of you know there is something called New Development Bank? In which country? That at least nobody knows. So I think this is something you need to really make, we need to bring to the fore the role of NDB in addressing the kind of current challenges that we are facing right now. In terms of India taking up a major role, I think I'm sure all of you, part of the G20 deliberations, one of the important contribution of India in this aspect is bringing the whole global south, the voice of the global south to the fore. And in fact, the way India proposed African Union into the G20s, that only shows that, how BRICS as a backdoor kind of a, deliberations has helped bringing the African Union to the whole G20. So there is a need for continuous cooperation between these countries, and somehow within the BRICS also, again, we keep questioning what are the common thread between the BRICS. But if you look at the recent, Russia-Ukraine war, the way I don't know anybody could have predicted that the impact of Russia-Ukraine war on India's inflation would be very minimal. In fact, there was a deflationary situation that we had faced where India was getting Russian oil at the 30% premium. In fact, the first time we started taxing export on the exports, the windfall gain taxes and all those things have been brought in. So the point I'm trying to say is that, in fact, the BRICS actually cooperated among themselves, even during the kind of turmoil or turbulence that we face. So the kind of oil. I think oil is a big commodity for any country, for any stability. And I think India could overcome is largely because of the BRICS cooperation that we have faced. And we also have the geographical advantage between Russia, China, and India. I'm not sure how much Brazil and South Africa benefited, but I think India certainly benefited because of the BRICS kind of cooperation. And we are also reciprocating right now, right? I mean, the rice exports and all those things. So we are also trying to make it as a strategic kind of a commodity right now. The way oil has been made as a strategic commodity, India is making rice as a strategic commodity. And I think if you look at the recent decision by India, I'm sure this BRICS Plus, I think, has a much better bargaining power in this whole Russia, it's in the rice trade that we have right now. I, I don't know whether it's Suresh or Professor Christopher pointed out, when you're talking about BRICS and global turbulence, the parameters keep changing, right? Equilibrium keeps changing. It's some kind of a dynamic equilibrium. But I think in the whole episode, a whole discussion, what happens is that there are some parameters or some indicators that is being defined by the advanced countries. I'm not going to talk more about how to reform United Nations, and I think so much has been talked about Security Council and all those things. But I think when it comes to the indicators, he talked about human rights. And I think we should have different definitions. This is where I would think that BRICS as a group should really push for kind of indicators which is customized for domestic conditions. And I mean, when you talk about human rights, now anybody can talk about human rights violation in the New York City. Now we don't talk about that, but we talk about human rights violation, the kind of definition that imposed on emerging market economies like ours. And I also want to give you one more indicator, which I think we are working on that. We talk about gender inequality. I'll just give one example. When you talk about gender inequality, the definition is political participation. Political participation includes only women in parliament. Okay. Now, if you take women in parliament, I'm sure all of you know how many women are there in the parliament. But when you take political participation, you need to take all the governments. In India, we have center, state, and local bodies. When you take the local bodies, right now, almost 50% of representatives are actually women. Now, when you include that, the narrative keeps changing. We are much above, in fact, if you look at the political participation at the local government, ours is almost 45 compared to the highest is 51, Iceland or something like that. We are in the top 5 countries in the world. So the point I'm trying to say is that BRICS Plus as a group, I think we need to focus more on their own indicators, I think, rather than talking about just juxtaposing the kind of indicator that's coming from United Nations. I mean, I have much more to say on that kind of global indicators, but I would like to limit there itself. In fact, you talk about ESG, you have different standards for advanced countries and different standards for emerging market countries. I think somehow we are actually just trying to imitate that. I think that needs to be, I'm glad the government of India is actually taking a different view on all these indicators. And I think that is really useful. Another thing that I thought, which is common to the BRICS countries, is the level of productivity. I know you have done so much work on productivity, but if you look at the productivity of BRICS countries compared to other countries, I think we have the huge gap. I mean, we even if you compare with Chinese productivity, other countries. So I think this is another place where the BRICS Plus has to really have some kind of cooperation. In fact, I would like to add one more line to you, Himanshu's slide. You should have a BRICS Productivity Council. You have many things, and there are a lot of lessons that can be learned between the countries, how we can improve the productivities in such a way that India can be on the top of the world when it comes to improvement in the productivity. Of course, there are some data that says India's productivity growth is much higher than even the Chinese productivity growth. But to pull everybody together, I think we need to have some kind of studies or sharing knowledge between the countries when it comes to productivity thing. In the post-COVID period, I think the kind of decoupling that we are talking about, somehow within the BRICS countries also, I think if you look at the data for the past 20 years, many of the big BRICS countries have running trade surplus with advanced countries. I don't know how many of you seen the data. Now, with the European Union, we run the trade surplus. I think so for students, they should be surprised to know that for the United States, India runs trade surplus. But within the BRICS countries, we run trade deficit. I think there is again a huge space where you can reduce your trade deficit between the BRICS countries. And particularly when it comes to Russia, China, and India, I think we keep running large trade deficit between us. And I think that's some place where we can talk about. And also there are a lot of apprehension between the countries. The way we have not participated in RCEP and also in the BRI, it only suggests that we have not much of common confidence between the two countries. Like RCEP is a big trading group, but India is avoided joining the RCEP. Similarly, what happened to BRI, and I think these are some of the areas where the BRICS governance is something that one can really look at it. One last point that I have is that there are two things. I think when you look at post-COVID, India, South Africa again cooperated between themselves when it comes to arguing for making vaccine as IPR. And these are the areas where you still feel that there is still large scope for BRICS to really survive. And similarly, when you talk about digital public infrastructure, I think India could really share a DPI technology to all these countries, maybe except China, I think. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of international public goods available within the BRICS countries. And I think they need, certainly they need a lot of, cooperation to exchange this global public good such a way that, the BRICS plus can really benefit out of it. And so that, you can always overcome the turmoil or the turbulence that these countries are facing. Let me stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Madhumurthy, for raising very important issues as far as the global macroeconomy is concerned in terms of trade, in terms of productivity, as well as very important digital public infrastructure, etc. May I now invite Professor Alexei Babchev to share his thoughts? Over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. The 21st century starts as a time of turbulence. From the beginning of 21st century, it became evident that the change of climate is very strong in its mass-up touch all countries of the world. This climate changes was the first turbulence which influences countries and world order. But it was only first turbulence process. After this, it became the COVID as the second turbulence process in the world. The turbulence process of COVID started in 2-3 months. All the life and the ordinary people in the world changed dramatically. All relations of countries, all flights, all communications was reshaped. People stay at homes and communicate mostly distant. So it was second turbulence process. But after this, another turbulence process also appears. First of all, military turbulence, a lot of different local wars, including the military clash of Russia, not only with Ukraine, but mostly with global West, as the United States and NATO, shows that this turbulence touch not only Russia and the global West, but all the countries of the world, including not just losses, but some gains from the reshaping of the trade flows in the world. After this, next turbulence, economic turbulence, inflation, economic growth just stopped, mostly stopped in the world. And economic turbulence interacted with military turbulence, with the turbulence of climate, in climate. After this, social turbulence, like protests now in Europe, like a lot of immigration and moving of the massive movement of the people from different countries to Europe and so on and so on. Now we can see the political turbulence mostly in the United States, and not only in the United States. This is a political turbulence which can lead us to unpredictable consequences. And the foundation, in the foundation of these turbulences, I think, this is a technology turbulence, because the rapid growth of artificial intelligence systems, chatbots and so reshaping our life. In medicine, responses to COVID, new medicine has changed everything. Anti-cancer preparates and medicines and so on. New transportation, electric cars and so on, drones, internet technologies, new agricultures, changes in traditional food supply. We can see that different processes of turbulence interact each other and influence each other. I would like to say that turmoil, this is a paramount top form of the turbulence, consisting from different processes of turbulences which interact each other. So that's why I think that title of our session, Governance Until the Time of Global Turmoil, means that the governance is the time of different and interactive process of turbulences. What we can do in this situation? First of all, each turbulence process creates its own crisis. Crisis in climate, crisis in military actions and interaction of the different kinds, crisis in economics, crisis in social sphere, political crisis, and so on. And turmoil create and much more terrible thing, multi-crisis, crisis in different areas which appears simultaneously and touch all countries, of course, in a different manner, but touch everybody. Such a crisis, multi-crisis, need some collective response. It's impossible that one country can separately to respond to all this crisis by itself. For example, a military crisis which Russia tried to stop and to come to some end, I can say that it's impossible efforts to use efforts of just one country, Russia, to stop all this military crisis. It's impossible to stop economic crisis only using the resources and actions from India and China. It's impossible to pass a crisis in the area of climate by producing the green response from some particular countries. We should to work cooperatively. And question, open question, which combination of countries, union of countries, and so on, can answer this multi-crisis. BRICS at the moment is not homogeneous structure. This is mostly the situation when BRIC countries look each other to understand practices each other, not sometimes cooperate, sometimes not cooperate, sometimes working cooperatively, sometimes not. To answer this multi-crisis, all BRICS countries should work together jointly. It should be unified response. It's the future of BRICS. Would we like to do such a thing or not? We would like to do such a thing. BRICS should be unified, and more countries should be unified in the frame of BRICS. Of course, except BRICS, we have another unions of the countries, like European Union, like military union as NATO, like G7 countries and United States. Are they ready to give their response to the crisis cooperatively with BRICS or not? This is an open question. At the moment, I think that not. By the way, in future, I think that BRICS will be more and more cooperate and more unified. And this vision is very now spread in Russia, and it's our hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alexei, for two things. One, for this excellent mapping of the series of crises and turbulences that we see, and then trying to characterize this in terms of its current context and relevance. Thank you so much. And more importantly, for sticking on to the time. I also noticed that we have a lot of things in common in BRICS, including the color of the sofas in which we are sitting, Professor Alexei, and we share the same kind of sofas. Okay, thank you so much. May I now invite Professor Christopher Tapscott to share his thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick because I had a long time at the podium. Just like to start off with the notion of governance, which is a very amorphous word that is used, thrown around a lot. And I don't think there's a common understanding of what it actually means. Funny enough, if you look up in the public administration, public policy literature, you won't find the word governance prior to the 1990s. And it has actually been attributed to the World Bank that first brought it out in a policy paper on Africa. And there it referred to issues of accountability, transparency, efficiency, effectiveness. There's a whole list of participatory. And ironically, it was a conditionality of aid. You had to have good governance before you tick the box for being a suitable recipient of aid. So it's a slight irony that we're talking about it, but it was exactly the same World Bank which is imposing these conditionalities that we've now adopted the term itself. And it then, as it's commonly understood, it does refer to institutions, to rulemaking, to practices, and you see these entrenched in big organizations like the UN, World Bank, and others. But based on those criteria, could it be even said that BRICS has a governance structure if we're taking those as criteria? And I think this is precisely the concern that Professor Alexei Barabashev has, exactly that, is to say, what are your rules? What are your areas of agreement? And it's, in a sense, to me, and also an issue, because down the line, there will need to be more certainty on these things. As it gets bigger, the more you have need for rules. And you need to have more certainty in what you agree on. Otherwise, it's just going to be many voices speaking about things and very little being done. And BRICS can't be everything to everybody. And it does have to focus, and it's got to choose its topics carefully, because it can be spinning off in all sorts of different directions. Colleague Himanshu Mishra here has pointed out global change. That's a no-brainer. It has to support that. It has to support the Paris Agreement. It has to, in fact, my own feeling, it should be focusing very much on implementation of Agenda 2030, the SDGs, because subsumed in that is actually a lot of those ambitions of a non-polarized world, of a more multilateral world, a world which is not polarized in the way that it is at the moment. And when it comes to fighting, I mean, for me, what was the most disappointing things was in how the world, and particularly how the North, addressed the COVID pandemic. It fell at the first hurdle of the SDGs. Retaining rights, intellectual property rights on the manufacture of vaccines, and hundreds of thousands of people died because of that. At the same time, the big pharmaceuticals made billions out of it. So where was this notion of commonality? So I think building pressure on key areas, to me, going forward, is where BRICS can make a big impact. And as I mentioned in the presentation, working more together, more cooperation is going to be the way forward. I'll stop there because I've had taken up a lot of time before.
Thank you, Professor Christopher, for re-emphasizing this important role of rules and focus, and bringing focus back, especially when BRICS is really expanding. Thank you very much. So may I now request Professor Vivekanandan to share his thoughts? Sure.
Good afternoon to all the distinguished panelists and other members who are attending this. So we had a journalist talking, and an economist giving his perspective, and a professor of management giving a perspective. So the last man standing is person from law, right? There is a famous quote almost a century back by Thomas Holland. It said, "International law is the vanishing point of jurisprudence," is a famous quote. Or in other words, that when you start implementing things internationally, it vanishes. Whereas you are able to effectively implement within the framework what you call nation state. This was 100 years back. And for a long time, sadly, it was a truism. When First World War happened, or the Second World War happened, people realized that, after all, Thomas Holland was right. But we need to take stock much after Second World War II as a benchmark. After Second World War II, if you look at the last 70 years plus, the word which our moderator started with the nomenclature, turbulence and turmoil. When you call turbulence, at least means, I'm little away from science for a long time. For me, turbulence is every time when I do air travel, right? You put your seat belt, and then, if you're a regular air travel, you're a little calm. You're a not so frequent, people start praying in the aircraft. I can see, people praying next to me. All that happens. And then the pilot comes and reassures you that now it's okay, but he still advises you, keep your seat belt, right? He always says, whether turbulence or no turbulence, be prepared. So the turbulence, he said about interchangeably turbulence, turmoil. If turbulence and turmoil goes beyond a point, we are really talking about a situation of a disaster, which was told by, our NDTV editor. He talked about disaster management and then how to manage disaster. So the question is, disaster management from outside human governance is something which you and I have no control. We use the word force majeure. In law, even in any contract, cannot be performed if there is a word called force majeure, which means hand of God. They call it hand of God. So that is okay, as you said, as the world is tackling through its science and technology about that. But what happens, as the very first presentation talked, where they're serious about disaster management, many more things could be tackled by the current status of science and technology is still not tackled. So if I look at governance in global thing, the very first thing which comes to all of our mind, just couple of years back, rich and poor, different colors, different religions, different thing, all were facing one crisis, the pandemic. I'm pretty sure 2 years back, the humanity was in its best, in a way, that you had people braving this and working in hospitals, braving this, people doing things. And suddenly, we really felt a love for everyone in the world. But sadly, within a year of pandemic receding, probably we thought it's a new world order after pandemic. After pandemic, it's going to be a new humanity, and we'll prove Holland is wrong. That international law will come in. But if you take stock, the turbulence is already there. An year later, you had war on the, on the Russian-Ukraine front. You had a ongoing thing going between Israel and Palestine. You really find, sometimes we're taking stands, sometimes we are bystanders looking at it. So again, the ghost of Holland is coming. Whether is it going to be a vanishing point of jurisprudence is something which people started talking. So if I try to look at a very positive outlook, that we can roll back what Holland said, we can roll back, we need to at least look at segregating economics and politics, not in the sense you cannot segregate as it is, but if you look at the treatment, what we do, in the 70 years, I would say from economic front, there has been certain level of international law implementation, especially after the advent of World Trade Organization and other types of agreements. You see there is certain level of buoyancy. There may be a lot of criticism, there are a lot of other issues, but if you really look at, in all across I call it as state level projection. But within the state level, inequality and distribution, access has been a constant thing. It is not something which has been all along that will be issue about what is happening. So I would say economics, science, technology, to an extent, in the 70 years, we can call it half glass full, right? But when it comes to other issues, that's what one other thing is. If it is, why is the question for science? How is the question for technology? For whom is the question for law? So when I come to the law and access and distribution, then internally also every country in BRICS will have its own big issues inside, and then we are having north-south, globally speaking. So it is you need a very creative approach to resolve this. But when it comes to other much deeper problem, which I call political, sometimes may not directly to do with economics. Many of the conflicts, what you see, is not at all directly anything economic issue to be resolved. It is to do with, I would call it, we are part of history. We don't just clean our minds of the past and move. This will again repeat to an extent. But what do we do about that? So this requires, I would say, in a level, the importance of BRICS, as my other speakers kept putting it across, multipolarity is one way which can minimize the crisis. I'm not going to tell multipolarity will completely, remove and the world will be, one place of peace. Multipolarity to a great extent can contain turmoil, can contain turbulence without leading it to a disaster. So in that context, I would put it in this topic, what is given to me in a brief way is BRICS, which basically came not because of a political alignment, but because of certain economic alignment, which they were respectively strongly emerging within a context like Asia, India, and China, and within the context of Latin America, Brazil, and South Africa, which got independence much late, but became a natural leader by its own experience and by its own insights. So that level, this economic upsurge made BRICS to come. To an extent, politically also, they had one single aspiration, that all of them were coming out of colonialism, trying to have their own rightful place in the global order. So that way, there has been an economic and political kind of alignment. But as the speaker today in the inaugural thing said, there are going to be a lot of issues which has to be ironed out. How do we do that? As I said, economics could be clear numbers, facts, and try to do that. But politics is art. Politics is about give and take. Politics is about not losing sight of the larger goal, where every time you do take some hit and some compromise. This, in my opinion, will depend upon the leadership. When I say leader, I'm not putting one single leader here. The leadership positions of these countries, and the one who shapes this leadership in terms of different think tanks, including academia, which will play a great role, as very interestingly pointed by Professor Tapscott, that it is not, what you call as a revenge on North. It is about reversing the North, which I like the term, what he said. So it's very, very important, because end of the day, I would say that in life, all of us have a plan B, right? I'm supposed to be back in my campus at 12, and I was texting them that, slightly postpone it, because that plan B should work, because plan A sometimes doesn't work the way we want. So, but let us accept one thing, there is no planet B. There is only planet A. You don't have planet B. As long as this is realized across the board, from leadership to think tanks, I call it, be industry, be what you call as activist, be, academia, all of them, then I do think that this crisis, what we call, whichever way we want to use, turmoil, turbulence, can be brought under control. And till the time that wearing the seat belt is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Vivekanand, for highlighting very important issues as far as international law is concerned. So we have now come to the end of this panel discussion, and I'm afraid I don't have much time for questions and discussions. But if there are any pressing questions, I would take maximum 2, not more than that. Yes, I can see a hand. Can we have the mic there?
This is Amitav Basu from Center for Environmental Management and Participatory Development in Kolkata. I thank the panelists for a very thought-provoking discussion. But if my understanding is correct, the submission that I'm going to make before this August panel is that one of the fundamental purpose of BRICS is to provide an alternative development model. If that be so, and taking into consideration the heterogeneity of the BRICS members, the fund constraint, and the consensus approach, then what is the view of the panelists on whether BRICS for the short term should follow a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious growth path, and have a large number of agenda, or prioritize the areas in which they are to concentrate and take the governance so as to help the members to develop and provide a direction to the world to take the Brundtland report into achievement, which it has not done since 1987.
Okay, thank you. Who among the panelists would like to take that question? Yeah, Professor Christopher?
Yeah, just a quick response. I do agree. I think that one needs to differentiate between panels like this, which are, and cultural ones, which are really side issues. But I do agree on the critical issues. There needs to be a determined focus on that. I do really agree with that. The other thing is to be cognizant of the length of time it will take to bring about certain types of change. So a BRICS currency, which everybody would like, is held up in many different ways. It's held up by the fact that countries like China have huge dollar denominations. A lot of their reserves are in dollars. So they cannot arbitrarily and hurriedly change to another currency without losing a lot of value. So I'm being realistic about the timeframes, but I think colleagues mentioning having targets and things like this are quite useful. But I do agree that a narrower focus would be a good thing going forward.
Anyone who would like to add? Okay. One more last question, anyone?
Hello, may I add a little bit? Barabashev Alexei,
Oh, yeah, please.
answer. It's me. Yeah, it's me.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's me. You found me. Okay, okay. I would like to add a couple of words to answer of Professor Tapscott. I think that first of all, BRICS plus new countries in BRICS will reshape the concept of BRICS in many essential parts. And it's difficult to say what will be after the new countries of BRICS will start the activity inside the BRICS. Second, I think that economic cooperation is not enough. And this is my response to the previous speaker also of our discussion. Because economic cooperation is in high level is impacted by political issues. So I think that it's impossible just to develop economically and not to cooperate politically. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, I think we are running short of time, and yeah, one last question. Yeah.
Hello, sir. So my name is Aditi and I'm from PGP batch 2224. So my question is open to all the panelists. So what are your views on Deborah Stone policy paradox in times of turmoil and turbulence?
Little more clarity on.
So Deborah Stone's policy paradox is basically that there are many paradoxes
Yes.
in terms of policies and governance.
Yes.
So how does it translate to like in policy making in times of turmoil and turbulence in governance also?
Attempted. Yeah, the whole issue of paradox in policy making is an interesting one, but it's trying to reconcile two seemingly irreconcilable problems at the same time. It happened in COVID, for example. Do you save lives or do you save the economy? I think, though, that in any of these cases, there has to be compromise. Somewhere in between, you'll have to find a path. But paradox is worth studying in public policy because it confronts policymakers all the time. And I think it's an understudied area, but you're quite right. There is definitely paradox facing BRICS, and they need to sort it out. I can't give you what the answer will be from a BRICS perspective, but your question is a valid one.
Yeah, can I? Yeah. No, I think yours is a slightly broader question, but I think if you talk to any of the public policy makers, they will always say that this time is different. You know, so the point I'm trying to say is that it's a completely a dynamic environment. And I think the public policy had to keep evolving every day. And, you know, you talk to any central banker, they keep telling yesterday is not a reflection of today, right? Even you talk about financial market regulators, again, they will say the same thing. So in a sense that the policy paradox is just an outcome of the way, that dynamics keep evolving over a period of time. I think it's a continuous process. That's what I can just tell you. Now, but to the previous question, I'm not really sure whether BRICS was supposed to come out with a complete different development paradigm. I know if you look at the way BRICS have got together, there are a lot of complementarity between the countries. You take two big countries in that group. China was looking at a manufacturing or the industry kind of a model, and I think India was looking at the service kind of a model. But the common thing is that export-led kind of a growth model that they had. But I thought the whole purpose of the BRICS coming together was basically to have an alternative financial order. That's how, in the whole, in the ecosystem, I think the one institution came out of the BRICS is the NDB. So I think that is the only, in my view, it is proposing a completely different financial order compared to what we had, the Bretton Woods order of World Bank and IIM.
Just want to add, important in the sense public policy. The few centuries, they say 3 Gs were driving all the conflicts. One is gold, one is God, another is glory. Gold, you wanted. On the name of God, you continuously fighting. And glory is ideology. This 3G, what they say. And one poet said, all the 3G has made world an unlivable place. He said one solution which we should try another G is called gender. It is interesting as we celebrate tomorrow, International Women's Day. The question of public policy making always is done in the prism of men. Governance is done in the prism of men. Many things. If you're going to bring 50% of the world population to be some level of, decision making, probably we will entirely look at different, as they call the yin and yang. And so I'm pretty sure BRICS, as he pointed out, is far ahead in certain spaces in terms of empowering women. And that should have a different public policy and less turbulence. Thank you.
10 seconds? Yeah. Last 10 seconds. Yeah. They have 3 mic on. I would say that since 2020, last 3-4 years, there have been a few setbacks that BRICS has suffered. I think COVID-19, an age of economic contraction, and all major economies suffered. BRICS states also suffered, and somewhere everyone was trying to survive. That was followed by Russia-Ukraine war. That had its own turbulence in the global economy. And now with the new members coming onto the BRICS fold, I think they need to give a big push to the idea of BRICS in terms of, taking everyone on board and try and restructure the priorities with a regained focus and try and address the challenges that we have discussed here.
Okay. Thank you. I think, sorry, we have to close this now. I'll take 10 seconds. Let me first thank all my distinguished panelists for this very wonderful, thought-provoking comments and insights that they have provided. We have covered a lot of ground, from setting standards to climate action, to having clear-cut rules, to the role of technology, as well as international law. And I think these are very important issues because we are going through multiple transitions at the same time. There's an energy transition that is happening. There is structural change and, structural transition that is taking place in a lot of economies. So very, very important issues that have emerged. And these are very important areas where there is possibility for further collaboration. So thank you once again. Thank you very much for this wonderful, insightful panel. And I close with apologies for 2 things. One, I have overshot the time by, according to my watch, 6 minutes. I'm sorry for that. And second, by bringing in this term turbulence and creating a turbulence in terms of moving away. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you once again.
Thank you.
We would like to thank our moderator and panelists for such an enlightening discussion. I would like to call upon the stage Professor Ram Kumar Kakani, Director, IIM Raipur, to felicitate our panelists with a memento. Shri Himanshu Shekhar Mishra. Professor Anar Bhanumurthy. Professor Christopher Tapscott. Professor V.C. Vivekanandan.
Thank you, sir. I would like to call upon stage Professor Asha Purna to facilitate our moderator with a memento.
Thank you, ma'am. As we draw the curtains on this intellectually stimulating panel discussion, we, on behalf of IIM Raipur, extend our deepest gratitude to all our esteemed speakers for the captivating and insightful contributions. We have two announcements to make. All the participants, PhD scholars, and faculty members are cordially invited for an online guest session by Professor Eleanor Glore, Fellow at McLaughlin College, York University, Toronto, from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. in classroom 101. All the guests, delegates, and participants are requested to be present in front of MDC by 7:15 p.m. for dinner tonight. Vehicles are arranged and the escort team will assist you. We hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
All the students are requested to wait while the guests leave the auditorium.